So we're studying the parables on Wednesday nights, and so we're going to another parable. We're still in the book of Matthew, so we go to Matthew 25, and we're going to look at the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, as it's titled in my translation. And these are, such helpful studies, to read these stories that Jesus told that have really one main point usually, but they do have many aspects to them that are interesting and good to think about and apply to our own lives. And so this one here is called the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. He does mention this in verse 1, that the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins. So he is talking about these women and their relationship to the bride of a wedding. And I'll read through there, and then we'll go to our notes and talk about some of the application here. The kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them, but the wise took oil in their vessels along with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept, and at midnight a cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming, go out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "No, lest there should not be enough for us all. But you go rather to those who sell and buy some for yourselves." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered and said, "Assuredly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." And so the story here is told, and it's helpful to have kind of a historical background about how wedding feasts take place, because it is a little confusing, the story that you're seeing painted in your mind here. But Jesus says that there were 10 virgins, and they had lamps with them. And it says in verse 1, they went out to meet the bridegroom. And I have some historical background here at number 2. Well, let's look at number 1 first. It says, the parable of the wise and foolish virgins could also be understood as bridesmaids. And we'll talk just a little bit more about that in a moment. But you can think of them as bridesmaids, so to speak, who wait for the bridegroom. And in the story, we know that would be Christ, of course, to come and receive his guests to the wedding feast. And that's the idea generally about what the story is about. But the historical background is that it gives a little background about how these kinds of events take place whenever a marriage takes place. A village processional, it's like a parade through the streets of the village. A village processional escorts a newly married couple from the bride's home to a great banquet at the bridegroom's home. And this procession occurs at some unspecified time after the legal nuptials have been exchanged. And so torches light the way in the darkness, and so all the bridesmaids have to take enough oil to keep them burning for as long as might be necessary. Now that's a statement that I copied out of the New American Commentary. You can see there, it was just a way that it was worded that I just put it in there. But the idea is that the nuptials are exchanged at the bride's house so that the bridegroom now takes his wife home. He's going to take her to his house, and they will become a family, so to speak. Well, when the nuptials are done and all the business is taken care of there, all of the people who are involved in the banquet, in the big celebration of this marriage, are waiting to be caught up with the parade that goes through the streets of the village. And they go out to the edge of their property where the road is, and they're waiting. And they don't know exactly what time, just they have to wait for this processional to go by, and then they will join the merriment and make their way to the bridegroom's house. And that's when they will have their celebration and their banquet into the wee hours of the night until the banquet is over. And so that's the picture that's being painted by Jesus here, Matthew 25 and verse 1. The kingdom of heaven is likened to this story, and then he tries to apply it. He says there's 10 bridesmaids or virgins, and they took their lamps and they went out to meet the bridegroom. They went out to the edge of their property, so to speak, and they're just waiting for him to come by, the whole party really to come by, so they can then join it and go to the house where they will celebrate the wedding. So that's kind of the way to understand what's going on here. But obviously there was a delay, as it says in verse 5, the bridegroom was delayed, and then says they slumbered and slept, but the main point is that their oil and their lamps were continually burning. And then when they woke up to meet the procession, some of them didn't have any more oil to add to their lamps, and so their lights were going out. Okay, so let's now look at some of very quickly at number 1 there, the parallels in the parable. That is to say, what stands for what, so to speak. Some are quite obvious, so the virgins, as I mentioned, the reason that they're mentioned as virgins is because they were probably childhood friends or good friends of the bride. And so that's the idea there. I don't think it has to mean they stand for, somebody who lives a pure life and all that, though obviously if you're a Christian, you're expected to do that. But it means that they were good friends of the bride, and so they are waiting to join the celebration of her marriage. Okay? And so they would be a part of this bridal party, and they could rejoice with the bride at the wedding feast. And we'll see how that will apply to, obviously, Christians. In the New Testament, the bride of Christ is the church. And so we would be, in that sense, members of that community, right? The bridesmaids, so to speak. Because Christ is the bridegroom. And he's the one who's going to return one day in order to consummate the marriage, the betrothal, and we will all celebrate together on that day whenever he returns. That's the idea. And so we would be likened to this company of bridesmaids, so to speak, waiting for the return of the bride, the bridegroom. I'm sorry?
Are we married with Jesus?
Right, that's the New Testament picture, is Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 10, I have betrothed you as a chaste virgin to Christ. Talking about the church. And so Paul is focusing on chastity, but focusing on purity. So as Christians, we should live pure lives in order to be pure for the husband when he comes to consummate the marriage. That's the idea. Betrothal, we often say it's like our engagement. And in some senses it is. It's a little bit more legally binding back in those days. But it is a period of time before the consummation. In other words, the husband and wife don't come together as one flesh during the betrothal period. That's until after the vows are completed and the consummation can then take place, right? So we as the church are still in that state where we haven't consummated the marriage with Christ, so to speak, but we are required to remain pure. You remember that was a big deal with Joseph and Mary. Mary was found with child, and they were just betrothed. And Joseph knew it wasn't me. And so clearly she's been unfaithful to the wedding, to the betrothal vows, the vows of chastity. And so he was going to put her away. He would have to go through a divorce proceeding, which is not like our engagement now, but it was much more binding. But anyway, that's the idea. So Jesus is just kind of using this figure of speech. What do we make of the lamps? Well, I have here, obviously they put forth light. It would seem as if you could apply it to, letting your light shine before men and see your good works, that kind of thing, to be involved in being the light of the world while we wait for Jesus. I have Matthew 5:14 through 16 there, which is, let your light so shine among men that they may see your good works. Seth?
The other cool thing about the lamps is they have to be maintained.
Maintained, and that was the whole...
Once saved, always saved.
Oh, yeah,
in
okay.
the figurative sense, because
Yeah.
it's not like, hey, you just got a lamp that's perpetually on. It's got to have oil, it's got to be trimmed, it's got to be
Yeah.
maintained till the rest comes.
And that was what they failed at. The foolish ones failed at, was maintaining that and keeping focused and ready and prepared, which that's the word I think to really think about, is be prepared at all times and do what's necessary to stay prepared for the second coming of Jesus. And we'll get into that when we look at the lessons that are mentioned. So yeah, very good. So the lamp, I think you can think of that in that way. We'll talk more about it later. And then letter C, what is meant by went out to meet the wedding procession, or went out to meet the bridegroom. That's where I was saying the historical picture is good to keep in mind. They went out to the gates of their property where the road would be, and they're waiting. So it doesn't mean that, okay, they went out and looking for him or whatever. They're just waiting at the edge of their property because they know he's going to be coming by. And that would be the second coming of Jesus, ultimately, that Christians wait for today. So we are, still on our property. So we're still in the world, but we're waiting for Jesus to come by, and then we will join him. All right. So I have about 7 lessons that I got from this that will help us think about it. And this, I think Seth just kind of mentioned it. Letter A, they got a good start, but they had no perseverance. This would be a lesson from those foolish ones. When it says they went out to meet the bridegroom, I think that would be they're accepted the invitation to the wedding feast. Okay, so they go out and now they are waiting for him to come. That means they become Christians, right? They got started and we're ready now. Now the lesson of the parable is, but always be prepared. And that's where they evidently failed. Letter B says the lesson would be a delay in the second coming. Now that word is used in verse 5, isn't it? But while the bridegroom was delayed. And this is kind of an underlying theme throughout these chapters, as a matter of fact. If you look in chapter 24, verse 48, when he's talking about the faithful and evil servants, that's a different parable he tells. But Jesus says in that parable in verse 48, if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying in his return, he begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with the drunkards, then the master of that servant will come on the day when he's not looking for him. So the delay, as I say on the notes, it can cause distraction, right? How many times do we you see somebody obey the gospel, become a Christian, and they're good for a few weeks, and then pretty soon they got the influences from their friends and their family and the people they've always used to run with, and pretty soon it just gets kind of old and repetitive to them, and they just lose focus and all the distractions. And so evidently here, the story that he tells before this about the evil servant, well, the master was delayed, and so he started getting caught up again with his old habits, beating and his servants, eating and drinking with the drunkards, and all of that. So we want to remember that about delay. But also, as I say here, delay can threaten perseverance, because it says in verse 5, they all slumbered and slept. And I don't know of any illustration or usage of this idea in the New Testament where that's a good thing for Christians, to slumber or sleep. Is it? So, even though we have wise and foolish virgins presented, they all seem to fall asleep. And so I think we should think of it in terms of, well, here's a lesson about being vigilant. persevere and stay awake. I mean, Jesus would say that whenever he was talking to his disciples, remember. He went off to pray. You stay here, stay awake and pray. And they fall asleep. They fall asleep. And they were kind of rebuked for that, Jim.
Isn't it in Galatians where it says, do not grow weary of doing good?
Do not grow weary in doing good. We will reap if we do not faint. Yeah, that's right, Galatians 6. So, yeah, I don't think it's a good thing to say you slumbered and slept. But either way, I think that's something to think about with relation to delay. And like I said, this is throughout these parables. In fact, look at the next parable, which is chapter 25, the parable of the talents. Verse 19 says what? After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So again, there's delay. So I think there's that idea there about, now it's been 2,000 years. And so we're still waiting. And Jesus seems to teach us here that, hey, you stay busy, stay vigilant, and that way you'll be prepared. All right, any comments on this so far? And then the letter C, the second coming will be unexpected. And again, this is another thing that is mentioned several times in the passage, but in our parable tonight, it's chapter 25, verse 6, that says what? It was when?
Midnight.
At midnight. So again, this is way later than usual, than it would be, earlier in the evening. Usually, from my understanding of the history, it is after sundown, but it's certainly not midnight. It would be way earlier than that. But he was delayed. And then at midnight, you'd think, I guess it's not going to happen. In fact, they've already fallen asleep. But the point is it's going to come unexpectedly. And I have these other verses mentioned because this all teaches the same thing. Chapter 24, verse 36. In fact, somebody can read that. I don't have to listen to myself.
Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes.
No, 24:36. I probably said that wrong. 24:36.
So I thought you said 46, sorry.
Oh, okay.
36, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father alone.
So nobody knows. And then 42.
Therefore be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming.
Yeah, so, and then we already mentioned the 48, 49, and 50, right? 50 says, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and in an hour that he is not aware of. So again, the idea is, since you don't know when, you might as well consider it's going to come unexpectedly and swiftly. And so we just need to be ready and be busy. And then letter D, you cannot depend on someone else's righteousness or preparation to save you. In other words, that cannot be transferred. How do we get that out of this story? Yeah. Hey, give us some of your oil. And then they say, no, because then we won't have enough for anybody. We'll all be in the dark. I don't think there's a lesson to take from their answer no there, other than, hey, you should have prepared. It's up to you to prepare. You need to stay ready. And so, oftentimes we do think of in terms of, I have a rich family history in the church. My parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and everything, and it makes you feel maybe secure. The devil can use that, in other words. No, you have a responsibility to be faithful as well. You can't expect just to be the proper lineage that's somehow going to save you, or I'm just part of a great group of Christians, and so the church is so faithful where I attend. Well, what about you? Are you busy in the Lord's work as well? Because God's going to judge us individually. So I think that's a way to think there. Letter E, so you must keep the fire burning. And then, so in other words, the lamp needs to continue to burn, right? It needs to be trimmed. And I have a couple of I think the following parables or following stories gives you more detail in how to do that. And so with number 1, faithfulness in stewardship. So the next parable, again, is the same basic story, but it's saying God gives you a stewardship. He blesses you with abilities and opportunities and resources in your life, and you need to be thinking of ways to employ them in His service. And so this is how you trim your lamps, so to speak, keep them burning, right? So that's the parable of the talents. And then the next story is the story of the sheep and the goats, right? And so I say here, you keep your fire burning with diligence in service and good works. So that would be service and good works toward others. So you remember the story there in verse 34. The king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, because I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me, and I was in prison, and you came to me." And then the question is asked, when did we see you like this? I don't remember seeing you, Lord, like this, but he applies it, of course, when you saw others in need and you helped them. That was as if you were serving me, right? So this is one way you keep the lamp burning. You be diligent in good works, in service to others, in sacrifice, and be generous. Be generous with the things God has given you. This is how you are good stewards of your talents and so forth. Any comments on that? I'm going to make it through these notes tonight, aren't I? And then letter F, the finality of the judgment day, I think, is something that's striking in this parable. The finality. How so? The door was shut. That sounds pretty final, doesn't it? There will be no way to go back and change the past. Your fate is then set in the final judgment. Now, it hasn't happened yet, so you can repent now, right? You can change your direction in life, and God will receive a repentant heart. But there's going to come a time. There's a point of no return. And so they said in verse 11, afterwards, the other virgins came saying, "Lord, Lord, open up to us." But he says, "Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you." So that's the finality of the judgment day. Somebody read Luke 13, 22 through 28. That's another story that has a similar point. Luke 13, 22 through 28.
And he was passing through from one city and village to another, teaching and proceeding on his way to Jerusalem. And someone said to him, "Lord, are there just a few who have been saved, or who are being saved?" And he said to them, "Strive to enter by the narrow door. For many, I tell you, will seek to enter and will not be able. Once the head of the house gets up and shuts the door, and you begin to stand outside and knock on the door, saying, 'Lord, open up to us,' and he will answer and say to you, 'I do not know where you are from.' Then you will begin to say, 'We ate and drank in your presence, and you taught in our streets.' And he will say, I tell you, I do not know where you are from. Depart from me, all of you evildoers.' There will be weeping, gnashing of teeth there when you see Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets in the kingdom of God, but yourselves being cast out."
So that's a sobering story. That's paralleled in Matthew 7, right? The final day when people are claiming that they did know him and they did follow him, but the whole time they were misguided and in error. But, you know, that again is that finality idea that we need to do the will of the Father now. It's tied in there to that last point, letter G, regret. The weeping and gnashing of teeth is that idea of regret, remorse, anguish, knowing that, man, it was right there in front of you, but you chose your selfish ways instead. And the regret in the story should motivate us today to guard against the same fate. You can hear the anguish when they're saying, Lord, open up to us, please. We're just right here at the door. All you got to do is open the door. No, it's too late. It's too late. So we need to be faithful now. Pretty sobering, isn't it? But there's no reason why we shouldn't take these things to heart. It's why we come to worship and Bible class, to remind ourselves of truths like this and read the Bible and you know, the onus now is when we wake up Monday morning or Thursday morning or whatever, and we go to work or we go to school or we go to whatever we're doing, it's like, now am I going to implement this truth? Or am I going to be distracted by the millions of things going on around me and fail to trim my lamp and stay prepared?
But there's so many people that don't read the Bible and don't study like we do, that they've got to be missing some of it. Because every class I learn something.
Yeah.
That we're here, and if somebody's not diligently reading it and trying to study
Yeah,
it,
that's-
they're not gonna, they may not even know what it says.
Yeah, that's, I think, you know, the New Testament really warns us about, you know, forsaking the assembly. You know, why would you do that when God has organized the church in this way to stay together and focused and keeping God's word and his truth running through your minds on a regular basis, and you're only harming yourself whenever you're choosing to do other things rather than focus on the Lord's will. Seek first the kingdom and his righteousness. Seth?
So one of the things that's always jumped out to me is, my translation says, the prudent took oil and flasks along with their lamp. So they prepared beforehand, like thought about, hey, what are we gonna be undertaking? What are we doing?
Yeah.
And so then, that, I always think about, is it, I think 12 maybe, that talks about what man builds a house without first counting the cost.
Mhm.
I know, at least in this congregation, I've always heard, especially from leadership, preparing our young men, our young women, even from like Griffin's age now, about what it means. Your life has to change. It means that, yeah, if you're wanting to become a Christian, you gotta count the cost of building this house, preparing with your oil,
Yeah.
long before you ever get into it, because that may mean, you know, remaining pure all through college for your spouse.
Mhm.
Or as if you ever aspire to be an elder in the church, making sure you marry the right person so that you don't fall. It's a lot farther than just, I
Mhm.
need to be washed from my sins right now. And so I think there's a huge undertone there in being prepared and knowing what the long picture means to remain faithful, who I need to surround myself with, where I need to work,
Yeah.
as opposed to just jumping into it and, oh, I'm saved today, but I haven't thought about what my life's gonna look like 5-10 years from now.
That's right. I mean, it is. It's a marathon, not a sprint, I've heard.
That you have to plan for.
Yeah, and you have to plan for it. Hopefully have a good understanding of what it entails, so that whenever you are off and running, you know, hey, you know, sometimes things are going to get tough. Sometimes things are going to get difficult, but I can make it through. I can trust in the Lord and I can stay focused. But if you don't have that kind of preparation and you don't have that kind of instruction early on, then perhaps you have misconceptions about what it's about, and you, after a short time, fall away. You know, like we mentioned about many people who do that. So great comments and great thoughts for sure. So I mean, those are the lessons I came up with. I'm sure there are others that could be brought out. My final point there is just what is the big idea, and I just kind of summarize it with 3 statements. Like the bridegroom, God may delay his coming longer than people expect. In other words, they need to be prepared for the long haul, which is really what we've been saying, I guess. Doesn't matter if it's delayed, we still have business to take care of and things to focus on, and we must do that. So like the wise bridesmaids, his followers must prepare for such a delay. Discipleship may be more arduous than the novice suspects. It's interesting, I noticed in this parable we're studying, they weren't expecting it to be quite as demanding, right? They ran out of oil, so to speak. The next parable, they were expecting it to be more difficult than it actually was. Or at least the 1-talent man was, you remember? Oh, you only gave me this 1 talent, and I was scared to death of you. So I just went and buried it so that I wouldn't lose it. They were afraid it was going to be too difficult. So there's both dangers to avoid. Don't think it's a cakewalk and life is going to be a bowl of cherries. That's the health and wealth idea of the gospel. At the same time, don't think that you're going to have to go it alone. You need to surround yourself with brethren that encourage you on a daily basis. Trust that the Lord walks with you, and step out in faith and live a purposeful life. And it can be exciting and at the same time challenging, but that's where true happiness comes from. And so in this story, it's more arduous than many people might expect. But like the foolish bridesmaids, those who do not prepare adequately may discover there will be a point of no return. When the end comes, it'll be too late to undo the damage of neglect. So those are just restatements of what we've been talking about all class period, but I appreciate your attention. That was the second bell, wasn't it? So we'll be dismissed there, and we'll move on to another parable next time. We are meeting, and Seth will announce this, I guess. I'm asking you to announce it next time, but we're going to meet Tuesday next week because of the holidays. That's what we did last year. We'll do it again this year. So Tuesday will be our meeting.
Hey, good evening, church. Thank y'all for being here. This is Wednesday night devotional. It's a pretty special moment for me. It's the first time I stand in front of an audience doing some biblical work, and so, yeah, thank y'all. It's a pretty cool moment for me. I want to begin with some reflection. Tell you guys a little bit about my family. Is there concern? No concern? Tell you a little bit about my family. We began here around this time last year. I think it was October, because I remember we had the Thanksgiving dinner. That was our first congregational meal. And as the days and weeks passed, we ended up having dinner with Clint and Veronica, where we discussed several topics, but among them, we pointed out that we wanted to be members, and I wanted to be a better Christian. And also, I had this feeling that I didn't know enough about the Bible, similar to what Mr. Ann said. I wasn't studying, and through several failed attempts, I just wasn't making the progress that I wanted to hold myself to, a standard I wanted to hold myself to. And so Clint responded. We created an action plan, right? Let's keep coming to church, and let's set up dedicated Bible studies. I learned kind of funny. It's something that Clint discovered. I interrupt a lot. I go through a lot of tangents. I need a lot of information. My brain is a little bit different, and so thank you for being patient. I appreciate that. So we read at a pace at about an hour a week. We met on Wednesdays before Bible study, and about 16 weeks worth of work later, Clint and I read the entire book. Present day. Yep, present day. So present day, I'm happy to report that I don't have that feeling anymore. I feel like I may not know everything, but I do have biblical knowledge that I've developed, and not only that, I'm developing a structure with a focus on New Testament, and beyond that, I'm developing a special interest in the life of the Apostle Paul. When I wrote this slide, I remember writing those sentences and thinking to myself that it was a happy moment for me to think that I couldn't have crafted those 3 bullet points last year. I wouldn't have even known what they meant. Thanks again. But now what, right? So now I have this body of knowledge, and how do I turn this body of knowledge into a verb or into an action? What do I do with it? And so at work, when young engineers ask me, how do I learn something new, or what do I do to progress? Often my response is, the best way to learn is to go out and teach a subject that you're interested in. And so here I am, right? But before I got here, a lot of anxiety. It was a lot of self-doubt and feelings of, like, who am I, right? Who am I to teach up here on this podium to a room full of people that know way more about the Bible? It was complex, it was complicated, felt a little unworthy. And as those feelings developed and I thought more about one day standing up here, I ran into Seth and I asked him, hey man, let me just do it, right? And Seth was willing. He put me on a schedule right away. Thank you, man, I appreciate that. So putting a date on the calendar made it real for me. And the more I thought about it, I came to the conclusion that feeling unworthy to teach could possibly be the natural progression of Christianity, feeling vulnerable or ill-equipped to teach, despite being empowered. And so, with that train of thought, I constructed a list of what I'm calling modest or shy or maybe unexpected teachers in the book of Acts. So, Peter's transformation. Did that show up? Yep. First on the list is Peter. My first impression of Peter was I read through the first couple chapters of the book of Acts was, wow, that guy's awesome. Inspired by the Holy Spirit, he stood in front of a crowd, and on that day, right, he's known for initiating the beginning of the Church of Christ. 3,000 souls were saved on the day where he preached, and I was impressed, from being that early in his development of becoming a Christian to all of a sudden saving 3,000 souls. I later came to find out, maybe a couple weeks later, that the same Peter rejected Jesus not once or twice, but 3 times, only weeks before, maybe weeks before. And so I thought it was funny because it took me back a bit. I was like, I was a little disappointed. This dude that I thought was really great, and but that happens, right? What a remarkable transformation for somebody that may have made mistakes in the past or isn't quite perfect, and then did what he had to, right, to teach others about God. Despite our past mistakes, God works through us. Ananias. Yep. Another one of my favorite characters. So, I'm sorry, I didn't mention, but I'm not going to call out the Bible reference, but the Bible reference on the slide if you guys want to follow along. Ananias was hesitant to meet Saul, later Paul. As Saul or Paul was introduced to us in the book of Acts, I remember commenting to Clint that I was imagining this character that was just a villain, right? Kicking down doors in the SWAT uniform and chasing Christians. And this is the picture that I had in my mind, this vicious character. And then I imagined the conversation Ananias had with the Lord, where he said, "I'd like you to approach this man. Not only approach him, he's blind. He's blind, he's hurt, and I want you to now heal him." Imagine that hesitation that Ananias felt. And so the encouragement I got out of this was Ananias really wasn't a teacher in this role, but his ability to obey played a key role in Saul's conversion. And sometimes in life, right, teaching is simply obeying God and sharing his message in everyday conversations, not necessarily podium-based, but just person to person. And the Apostle Paul, I like this dude. Forgive me, I'm a little informal with my pronouns. I like Paul. I love the way that he's introduced, and we kind of form a relationship with Paul. And I think that he's a fantastic example of unlikely teachers. As I mentioned earlier, when I was first introduced to Paul, I thought he was a villain, and I kind of disliked that. I kind of disliked him. But as Paul began to preach, I wonder, right, like having the same kind of, not history, but the same kind of approach where he made mistakes in the past, similar to Peter. How many people that listened to Paul, the man himself, right? How many people doubted his sincerity due to his own history of persecuting Christians? And despite all of that adversity, he had the courage and the fortitude to stand up in front of a crowd and teach. So Paul, again, reminds us that feeling unworthy or inadequate shouldn't stop us. I want to leave you with a message that it's not about being the best or the most knowledgeable. I think that a lot of this has to do with being bold, and despite feeling uncomfortable, having the acceptance and knowing that you're empowered. God qualifies the called, and allow God to work through you. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.